Greetings, YouTubers. In this video, we're going to go over federal debt figures, primarily federal debt per capita, nominal and inflation adjusted, so you can get an idea of how far in debt we are. Because there's been a lot of ignorant statements made, usually by progressives, on the debt, trying to downplay it. Of course, when Bush was president, or Reagan, or any Republican, it was a big deal. And some are actually saying now it's not a big deal at all, but it is. It's a huge deal, and it will bring this country down. I have all the links underneath the video as per usual, and I had my own census figures, but I went to Christopher Chantrell's website, and I even have the government links to government debt, their federal debt figures on the OMB website go back to 1940. Well, he's got them all the way back to 1792. And looking at his census figures that he had, they differ slightly from the ones I had, but usually not much, and only when you go way back, like more than a century and in years that were between the census. They didn't differ by much. I will include those as well, but I'm going to use him just to make it use his just to make it simpler. Before I begin, I need to mention a few things that progressives and some other people may leave out while pontificating about the national debt. For example, from fiscal year 1982 through fiscal year 1989, Social Security, in real inflation-adjusted dollars, grew at an annualized rate of 2.56% per year. From fiscal year 2010 through fiscal year 2013, it grew at an inflation-adjusted annualized rate of 2.6%. As you can see, this program is a budget buster, a Ponzi scheme, and is on autopilot. Those are just two examples from Social Security. Medicare is on the same trajectory starting in fiscal year 1981 and adjusting for inflation. Adjusting for inflation, you get that? The program's cost had more than doubled by fiscal year 1993. By fiscal year 2006, it fell just short of doubling again. You may remember in 1965, when the government was selling us this bill of goods, they said, oh, in 1990 dollars, Social Security is only going to cost about $12 billion. Well, the cost in 1990 dollars was over $100 billion. So they lied to us, like they usually do when they estimate the cost of something. Oh, it's only going to cost this much. Then they get the program going, well, too late. I guess we were off by 600 or more percent. Oh, well. One last point, dealing with interest payments on the federal debt. In Reagan and his Congress's final 4 fiscal years, 1986 through 1989, interest payments on the debt, adjusted for inflation, were $976.9 billion. To put that in context, in Bush's final 4 fiscal years 2006 through 2009, those payments were only $927.7 billion. Those same payments under Hussein, fiscal years 2010 through 2013, were only $836.7 billion. As you can see, those interest payments were higher, adjusted for inflation, and they were a much higher portion of all federal spending in the late 1980s than they were under Bush or Hussein. Those two lucked out with lower interest rates, but as Peter Schiff says, the Fed will have to take away the punch bowl at some point. So I had to mention that first, put it in context. It's going to be very hard to balance the budget with these entitlement programs growing on autopilot and the welfare state. Let's begin with the main event. Federal debt in nominal dollars per capita was a whopping $2.71 back in 1850. Back then, that was a lot of money, but still much smaller than today's debt, as you'll see when I go over inflation-adjusted debt per capita later. In 1860, it was $2.06. These are all nominal dollars now, don't forget. In 1866, not long after the end of the Civil War, which added a lot of debt, it was $78.03 per capita, a huge increase. And as you'll see, before we got the income tax, when we'd have a war, the debt would fall much quicker and get much closer to the pre-war level. After that, after 1866, it started a slow downwards trajectory with some very minor upwards fluctuations, but the general trend was downward. By 1893, federal debt per capita in nominal dollars was $23.18. That was a massive decrease over a 27-year time frame. After that, it began a general upwards trajectory. In 1900, it was $28.04. In 1913, the year the 16th Amendment was added to the Constitution, giving Washington another revenue stream in which to waste. Debt per capita was $30.32. In 1919, not long after the end of World War I, which added gobs of debt, capita debt was $261.97. As you'll learn, even though debt began to recede after this war, it never got close to its pre-war low. In 1930, the onset of the Great Depression, debt per capita was $131.36. By 1938, when the economy was cratering again, the total was $285.18. Even with the massive reductions in spending by Eisenhower and his Democrat Congress after the World War II spendathon, debt per capita was still over $1,611 in fiscal year 1961. Keep in mind, this was with a bottom tax rate of 20% or higher, and those making $250,000 in 2013 dollars being taxed at a rate of over 60%, and those making $1 million in 2013 dollars being taxed at a rate of almost 90%. Everyone got hammered. Even with this massive new revenue stream from Social Security, which had its rates routinely raised from 1950 to the early 1980s, debt continued to accumulate. The Medicare hospital insurance tax was also another revenue stream, along with a slew of excise taxes. Are we noticing a trend? I should also mention the 1938 Depression was almost as bad as the 1921 Depression and the 1930 Depression. In spite of that, and in spite of all that added debt, it didn't do any good in the late 30s. By fiscal year 1981, when those making $250,000 in 2013 dollars were routinely taxed at a rate of over 50%, those making over $1 million getting hit at a 70% rate or higher, debt per capita was still $4,350. Government will always spend what it takes in and then some. That's sort of an axiom in politics. In fiscal year 1989, federal debt per capita in nominal dollars was $11,638. By fiscal year 2001, that total was $20,247. By fiscal year 2009, it was $38,712. In fiscal year 2013, it was $52,888. Now let's run those totals and adjust for inflation. These figures are all in fiscal year 2009 dollars. You'll get a better gist of how much our debt has grown since the institution of the personal income tax, Social Security, and Medicare. In 1850, it was $57 adjusted for inflation in 2009 dollars, and in 1860 it was $42. 1866, $932. 1893, $514. 1900, $617. In 1913, per capita debt adjusted for inflation in fiscal year 2009 dollars in 1913 was $497. In 1919, it was $2,484. In 1928, it fell to $1,491. Even after massive income tax cuts, where only the super rich paid taxes, those making $250,000 and $2013 were in the 9% bracket under Coolidge, and those making $1 million landed in the 23% bracket, again adjusted for inflation. Federal debt per capita in 2013 dollars in 1928 was only $1,491. So we saw a massive decrease in that because Coolidge cut taxes and they cut spending. But it still did not hit the pre-World War I level. By 1930, it was $1,376. Then a trend began that was never reversed. In 1933, well, not for very long anyways, in 1933, federal debt per capita in 2009 dollars was $2,435. In 1938, $3,513. Keep in mind, this is even before our entry in World War II. Debt was accumulating rapidly. 1961, it was $9,113. Even with those massive, super duper high income tax rates on the super evil rich. In 1981, it was $8,957. A small reduction, but as these entitlement programs kept growing and growing and growing and growing, it's going to be tougher. And as we continue to try to be the globe's policeman, in 1989, it was $18,056. In 1993, it was $23,308. In 2001, it was $24,171 per person. In 2009, it was $38,712 per person in 2009 dollars. And in 2013, in those same inflation-adjusted 2009 dollars, in 2013, federal debt per capita was $49,618 per person. So, unless we reform Social Security and Medicare, quit being the globe's policeman, unless we do that, those interest payments on our debt, which were a major problem in the 1980s, are going to become a major problem again. And with a lot more debt now than we had in the 80s, we're in serious trouble. So if you're naive enough to believe that you're actually going to get your Social Security benefits, yeah, you'll get every penny. It's just not going to buy anything. If you're that naive, then you probably will be surprised when the economy craters again. And of course, we're seeing a new normal. With high unemployment is the new normal. You've been warned. Have a nice day.